So John in Pennsylvania pronounced him as a theist with a general argument about a non-specific God, which I got to tell you, John, normally I'd be a little frustrated in saying, wow, we're going to deal with a general argument for a non-specific God. But honestly, at this point, I just tell me, I'm going to ask you to specify your non-specific God, but I only mean that in the sense of we need some kind of minimal definition of the God you're talking about and why you think it's believable. But welcome to the show.
Oh yeah, my point was, yes. I just didn't want to get into like a debate about like the Bible or different religions. My God is a supreme being, the creator of the universe. That's the God I'm talking about.
And have you got just like one argument for that you want to go over?
Yeah, I was just more think of your thoughts on some of the main ones. I hear a lot of theists go on that are jabbering all types of stuff. I think there's some pretty good arguments when you look at
John,
the cosmological argument.
John.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting us to go through like a list of arguments to tell you what our thoughts are, I got 20 years of content out there and I've gone through arguments all over the place. I'm more interested in like, what argument do you find most convincing? And then we can discuss that.
Okay. I think like a design argument is probably the most convincing for me. But my point was that I think it's more of the ensemble of arguments that is what kind of drives me to believe that there probably is a God.
Okay. So design style arguments come in a bunch of different forms, quite often making use of the anthropic principle to suggest that the universe appears as if it was made for us. And yet what we know from, for example, evolution is that we were designed by a process that is unthinking. We're what happens in this universe. It's kind of like Douglas Adams' famous quote about a puddle gaining consciousness and realizing that the crevice in which it is resting was perfectly designed for him and fits his every curve and form and everything else. We're what evolved given this. What makes you think that it was designed for us?
Yeah, I'm not sure if design for us is the argument I would use. I've heard of that, and I've heard it framed like this from a lot of atheists. Like the puddle argument. I've heard that. I just think like what we.
To be fair.
Okay, I'll start like. Can I just speak a bit on the topic?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to be fair, atheists are responding to design arguments from God. But go ahead.
Okay, so hopefully I can make a point that's a bit. So I would say like starting with the dawn of the scientific revolution. I mean, it looks to me that a lot of those great scientists, Newton, Max Planck, a bunch of other ones that kicked off the scientific revolution, studied nature because they thought it was intelligible and that they could rely on the human mind. So you need those presuppositions to do modern science. And those guys are theists. And then I think what we've learned about the cosmos and life with the DNA code, I think it makes more sense with the creator. And I don't think we can find, I think the probability of life happening is just so low with an unguided process.
How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, can I ask you a question?
Well, sure, if you want to make an assertion and just let it linger there without justifying it, go ahead.
Well, I just want to, what do you think about like that general idea of modern science arising from some of these theist thinkers?
So it's undeniable.
Like, how do you...
Are you going to ask, you're going to let me answer the question or not?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
So it's undeniable that many of the scientists, especially during the dawn of modern scientific models, were theistic. And yes, they looked at nature because they thought, as you said, nature is intelligible, but that means that we can make sense of it. Now, many of them were looking for God, but none of them found God. And now, in the modern realm of scientists, particularly amongst the scientific elite, the overwhelming majority do not believe in any sort of personal God at all. So if you're going to say, well, Newton and Planck believed it, so therefore there must be a good reason, well, why not look at all the modern scientists now and point out that the overwhelming majority of them don't believe it. So maybe it's more reasonable that we shouldn't believe it. But at the end of the day, it's not like Newton or Planck found evidence for God. The God idea is ultimately unfalsifiable. All they did was fail to falsify the unfalsifiable. But we did learn more about the universe, and we learned more about biology and physics and cosmology and all that stuff. The presuppositions that are involved that allow science to run, to make good inferences and good inductive reasoning, don't require or rely on any sort of God. So your claim about the scientists believing God is irrelevant to whether or not there's a God or a good reason for it. The intelligibility of the universe is irrelevant to whether or not there's a God or good reason for it. And whether or not we need to presuppose that the universe is intelligible is also irrelevant to whether or not there's a God or good reason for it. Not a good enough rebuttal?
Yeah, I mean, I get your point. I'm not. It's not like I'm arguing that because scientists believe a certain thing about God, we should. I don't think science can prove or disprove God, but I think findings about science make belief in God a lot more reasonable. The digital code of the DNA, for instance, the fact that the universe probably had a beginning.
Hang on. When you say the findings of science, when you say the findings of science make God way more believable, how do you explain how few scientists, particularly among those who understand the science best, how do you explain how few of them believe in a God if understanding the science makes God more reasonable? Are the scientists just unreasonable?
Now, you're saying belief. You're saying a scientist. You're making the same argument you were critiquing me of, though.
No, sir. I'm responding to your claim that a proper understanding of the science makes God more believable. When you say that, then you should take a look at the people who understand the science the best and see how many of them share your conclusion that a proper understanding of science leads to God. Because the people who understand the science best do not share your conclusion that a good understanding of science leads to God. Your argument is flawed.
No, I know there's many scientists don't believe in God. There's also plenty that do.
No, sir.
So yeah, I more want to hear what you think of it, and not just say the scientists.
I just told you what I think.
What do you think of?
Your argument is flawed for the reason I just pointed out.
But I'm looking at like discoveries in the science. I've read arguments about it. It doesn't convince me that many scientists don't drive that conclusion. I'm not saying science proves or disproves God.
What percentage of scientists in the National Academy of Scientists believe in a personal God?
I think it's 7%, sir.
7%. Now,
I don't think that's a good argument for what?
Hang on. You know why you'd think it was if you'd stop telling me that you don't think it's a good argument before I've actually made it, that'd be really impressive. So let's assume that you're corrected, and 7% of scientists in the National Academy of Sciences believe in a personal God. Are the other 93%, do they understand the science better than you do?
Yes, I'm not saying I'm smarter than PhD level.
I get it. So the 93% of scientists in your own thing all understand the science better than you do and better than I do. It's clear that they don't think, it's clear that this 93% don't think that science points to a personal God, and yet you do. Now, just looking at it, without any other information.
First of all, where do you get the personal God from? I never argued for a personal God in this conversation.
That's the question I specifically asked, and you answered.
Oh, I must have misunderstood. I'm just arguing for a God, the creator of the universe.
Well, I asked, okay, so would we agree, without digging through a bunch of statistics, that amongst the world's scientists if we took every scientist who understands the relevant sciences better than you or I do, what percentage of those agree with you that science leads to a God? Because some of the people who believe in a God and who understand the science still don't think that science points to a God. They just believe in a God for other reasons, right?
Yeah, I totally understand that. I think,
So
I mean,
what
there's many
percentage?
sociological reasons. I don't want to get
what
into that of why
what
people believe in what they do
oh
in
my
the
God.
21st century.
So wow, we got to make a fucking adjustment to the audio where people can actually hear us when they're talking. So, of all the scientists who understand the science best, what percentage of them agree with your conclusion that science points to God? You can just give an estimate. I'm not asking you to look it up.
I think it's about 10%, if I had to guess.
Sure. Why do you think the other 90%, in your estimation, don't agree with you? Are they wrong about the science?
No, there are arguments that modern understandings of evolution are not great, but there's plenty of people that believe in theistic evolution.
Yeah, literally nothing you said was in any way addressed what I was just asking.
I don't find the argument that 90% of scientists don't believe in a God like convincing point that science doesn't point to God.
So, okay, you just said that you don't find the fact that 90% of scientists don't think that science points to God convincing that science doesn't point to God. So you think that science points to God and that 90% of the scientists who know the science better than you do are wrong.
No, I don't think that. I'm not going to say they're wrong.
You did. Okay. Can we agree that either the science points to a God or it doesn't?
I think there are. You can.
This is a yes or no question. 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 There are no other options. Can we agree that the science either points to a God or it doesn't?
Yeah, I think so, but I think most scientists wouldn't say it either way.
John, just fucking yes or no when we're doing this, because it has to be. That's the basics of logic. Is something is either A or not A. Science either points to God or it doesn't point to God. That is an exhaustive, all-inclusive, only two fucking options. I asked the simplest yes or no question. All I needed was that. So now, for the question, does science point to God? You think the answer is yes. And the overwhelming majority of people who understand the science better than you think the answer is no. Please explain that disparity in conclusion.
I think a big part of that, if I didn't want to really get into this, I more wanted to think why you think the science doesn't point to God, without reference. But I'll say why I don't think many scientists believe in God or think science might point to God is because there's this rift that science, if there's an explanation that's not natural, that you can't even entertain that idea, even if the evidence might point to that.
Thank you.
So,
listen to me. Thank you.
Because that's so taboo in modern science.
Thank you. Stop and listen. If science cannot point to the supernatural, if science cannot appeal to the supernatural, if science cannot conclude the supernatural, listen to me. Science uses methodological naturalism. You're not allowed to appeal to the supernatural. You're not allowed to conclude the supernatural. We have no way of investigating the supernatural. Science, by its very nature, cannot point to the supernatural. And that's the statement that you were just making.
I think the ultimate goal of science is to get the truth. Science can't study the supernatural, but it can see things in the natural world, order the digital code in DNA, and point to something that might not be natural.
No, sir.
If they can detect it, then it is natural.
No, sir. The only thing that science can do is either create a model that confirms something or fail to confirm it. So we either know how DNA works and it's natural or we have a natural explanation for it, or we don't have a natural explanation. That does not mean the fact that we don't currently have a natural, we do, by the way, but for any given proposition.
I know what DNA is.
Listen,
okay? And how it works.
listen, or I will fucking mute you. For any given issue that science addresses, we explore it. And if we find a natural explanation, that becomes the scientific natural explanation. At no point has science ever found or confirmed any supernatural explanation, and it currently cannot. Our failure to find a naturalistic explanation does not mean that the correct explanation is supernatural, right?
Yes, I don't. Can I just speak for a bit now? Because I'm having trouble hearing you, I think, when I'm speaking.
Okay, I've muted you. I want to make sure that we're clear on this because you have contradicted yourself now a couple of times. Because when I asked you to explain the disparity between all of the scientists who know and understand the science better than you do, who don't agree with your conclusion that it points to the God, it's like if all of the mechanics in the world investigated my car, 90% of them concluded that my transmission was bad. And you, who are not a mechanic, who don't know my car as well as they do, are saying, I don't think they've reached the right conclusion. And all I asked was for you to explain that disparity. And you explained that science can only explain the natural. And I acknowledge that because that's all we can do is investigate. And if we don't come up with a natural explanation, that doesn't mean that a supernatural explanation is there. So all I was trying to get you to do was explain the disparity between your conclusion about science and the scientist's conclusion about science. Now you can explain that however you want.
Okay, I get your point. I'm not saying it might sound like I was proposing a God of the gaps argument. I don't mean that at all. I think science should always try to fill the gaps in our knowledge. My point was that certain findings about science make, we'll call it a God hypothesis, more likely. And I think a lot of scientists just don't consider that because it's taboo in the modern age.
Okay.
What's that?
No, as soon as you say that, we're done. I mean, I definitely want just listen. I'm still talking. I definitely want to get even here, and this shouldn't just be you and me doing back and forth. But your hypothesis for why you and scientists, the overwhelming majority of scientists, have reached a different conclusion about whether it points to God, is you think that they're biased because of a taboo, and okay, cool. But how would you ever demonstrate that?
I mean, I can't demonstrate that now, but there's plenty of arguments for why that's the case in modern science.
Yeah. This is a huge dose of copium that you just dished out for yourself.
I don't think it is. I don't think you're actually
I do think it
argument.
is, and I'm explaining to you that when 90% of the world's experts on science, 90% of the world's fucking experts on auto mechanics think that X is not indicated, and you, who are not an expert on either, come in and suggest that it is indicated and that they're biased because of a social taboo, you're dealing copium straight into your vein.
No, I think there's many reasons, but I'm just saying that's probably one of them.
Co-parter.
You co-parter.
Okay, you co-parter. You want to throw anything back at me since you can't come up with an actual argument or evidence and you won't acknowledge that you're not an expert, that you don't know what the hell you're talking about, but you want to suggest that 90% of the world's scientists are just afraid to come out against the social taboo? That there's a massive global conspiracy throughout the entire history of science where it recognizes, hey, we can't confirm the supernatural. And you're like, yeah, but where's your Nobel Prize, Coper?
Right.
Oh, he ran away.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow, Pokemon Master and Executive Producer on The Line. Would you like to support a specific show on The Line or The Line in general? There are special tiers on our Patreon and in our channel memberships. You can do just that. By the way, you could consider leaving a super thanks down below. You could also like, subscribe, and leave a regular comment. All of these are great. Now, I'm going to get back to crushing loneliness, but while I do that, why don't you check out one of these?